Everything you're about to hear is for education and entertainment purposes only. Whilst we are licensed, we're not aware of your personal financial circumstances. Any advice is general advice. Equity Mates operates under Australian Financial Services Licence 540697.
Equity Mates!
I will say this about investing. Everything you do learn is cumulative. What I learned at 20 is useful.
Equity.
Welcome to another episode of Equity Mates, a podcast where we explore what's possible in the world of elections. If you've just joined us for the very first time, a huge welcome to the community. We have a massive episode for you today. My name is Bryce, and as always, I'm joined by my equity buddy, Ren. How are you going?
I'm very good, Bryce. Very excited for this episode. We are releasing our election series. We are 1 week out from the Australian election. In today's episode, we're speaking to the two men who would be treasurer. Well, one man who wants to stay treasurer,
Yes.
that is the Labor Party's Jim Chalmers, and then challenging him is the Liberal Party's Angus Taylor.
Yes, looking forward to this one, Ren. Not often we get to speak to those that are leading the economic policy here in Australia, but we wanted to focus not just on the election here today, but really on what they both see as the long-term vision of Australia. Get us inspired.
Get us inspired, that is true. But I also think we need to be mindful that the decisions made about the economy today, or the decisions not made about the economy today, will ripple for decades to come. And so if we think about 2040 or 2050, there's a lot of ambition around what Australia could be or where we want to get Australia to. But those decisions really need to start being made today. And so that's how we wanted to frame both of these conversations. Start with the long term and then bring it back to, well, what does that mean in terms of what policies need to be brought to the election today? Now, we speak to both men in this interview. We don't want to be accused of playing favourites, so we are going to toss a coin to see who goes first. So, Bryce, let's say the Labor Party's heads, Liberal Party's tails.
All right.
You've got the coin flipping up.
I do, and it has come up as heads.
Okay, so we're going to start with the
Jim.
Labor Party, the sitting treasurer. Here is our interview with Jim Chalmers.
Well, Jim, welcome to Equity Mates.
Thanks for having me on the podcast.
So to kick off today, Jim, what is one thing that you agree with your counterpart on?
I think there's pretty broad agreement that we've got a productivity challenge in our economy. I think there are very substantial differences about how we go about addressing that. And we've got differences about how long that productivity challenge has been hanging around. But I think everyone across the major parties in the parliament understands that we've got a productivity problem, and that's why a big part of our agenda is all about getting inflation down, getting real wages up, keeping unemployment low. But a big part of our agenda is trying to turn that productivity challenge around as well, and you do that with technology, with skills, with the energy transformation. Trying to harness some of these big changes that we're seeing in our economy so that we're beneficiaries of that. It helps us make our economy more competitive, dynamic and productive. That's a big part of what we do in the Treasury portfolio.
Love that. And we're excited to unpack some of those pillars and some of the policies you want to take to the election. But we want to start with the long term and how you see Australia's long-term economic future. So let's pick an out year, 2040, 2050, wherever we want to think. What does Australia's economy look like in the long term? Where does the development come from? Where does the growth come from? What excites you longer term about the economy?
Yeah, I think about this a lot. I try and take a long-term view about our economy. I released this report called the Intergenerational Report. And what it says really is over the coming decades, our economy is going to be shaped by 5 big shifts. From globalisation to fragmentation, from IT to AI, from hydrocarbons to renewables, from a younger population to an older population. And the 5th one is what that means for the composition of our industrial base. And so I think a lot about that. I think our economy in the coming decades is going to be increasingly powered by cleaner and cheaper energy. Obviously, we're going to train our people to better adopt and adapt technology, particularly AI, machine learning. That's going to be a big part of our economy, a huge part, an exciting part of our economy as well. Getting the services sector right, particularly the care economy in the context of an ageing population. These are the big challenges. And, obviously a job like mine is really about managing the near term managing this really quite extreme global volatility that you guys grapple with as well. Managing this inflation challenge, which has been common around the world. Those are the kind of near-term things, but the longer-term opportunities for Australia are really exciting in some of those areas: energy, human capital, technology, and so they're a big focus too.
Well, let's go through each of those, starting with energy, and bring it back to the current election that we are about to go through. What are the policies that you're bringing to this election around clean energy?
So we've got a big Future Made in Australia agenda, which is about incentivising clean hydrogen, making sure that we make the most of this unbelievable opportunity we've got in critical minerals as a key input into the global net zero transformation. So we've got a big, broad suite of policies on energy, which really focuses on the industrial opportunity at the macro level. And then at the household level, we've got a plan to make household batteries 30% cheaper. That's going to shift the needle on emissions, but it's also going to help people put some downward pressure on their bills. And so we're coming at this from a bunch of different angles. I genuinely believe that in 20 or 30 years' time, this time frame that you're asking me about, I think people will look back on the 2020s, and one of the things that they will judge us on is whether we took the necessary steps to make the most of this energy transformation. I'm really confident that we are. I spend a lot of time working with the colleagues on this part of our economic policy. And you'll read from time to time that there's not big differences between the major parties in election campaigns, but this is an area where there is a very, very substantial difference. Building nuclear reactors in 20 years' time, the most expensive form of new energy, pushing up electricity prices, that's what our opponents are pitching up. We want to add more cleaner, cheaper, more reliable, increasingly renewable energy to the grid because we think that's the best way, not just to get those environmental outcomes that we need, but to get those economic outcomes and those industrial outcomes that we seek as well.
I'm glad you brought up nuclear because it's been an interesting sticking point in this election. We actually...
I'm told that you guys have been back and forth on nuclear a bit in the course of your broadcasting. Yeah.
So we saw numbers come out from the Climate Energy Federation today that put the coalition's plan at $4.3 trillion by 2050. Just wild numbers. But at the same time, I think a lot of people, us included, are attracted to the idea of clean baseload power. Is there not a middle ground where you can not put government and taxpayer money towards nuclear, but lift the federal ban on nuclear energy generation and just see if the private sector is interested? Overseas, we've seen Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Oracle all invest in nuclear. Is there not a middle path that could be taken here?
Let me make a couple of points about that. First of all, in other countries where they're investing in nuclear, they don't have our advantages. If the three of us sat down with a blank sheet of paper and wrote out the things that you need to be a renewable energy superpower, you'd basically be describing the Australian opportunity. Our combination of advantages is different to other parts of the world. Second thing, on the cost of it, the reason that we think that $600 billion price tag is right is because it's a Smart Energy Council number. It's based on the CSIRO and AEMO figuring. But the best way I've found to describe to people how expensive these things are, these nuclear reactors, is in the UK they're building one, and they've got a long history and experience with building these nuclear reactors. The one they're building right now is $87 billion, and the coalition want to build 7 of them. So I think it's ridiculous that they think that they can build them for kind of $20 billion or less. So there's an argument about that. The main part of your question about the ban and investor interest in it, you're probably the same as me. I spend huge chunks of my week knocking around with the investor community. I do that formally, informally, every way that I can. And I'm convinced that even if you lifted the ban, there'd be no interest. I haven't found anyone that wants to go anywhere near this for Australia. And I really mean that. And our investor community is excited about the net zero transformation. They're excited about cleaner, cheaper, more reliable, renewable energy. Nobody has said to me, "Can you lift the ban on nuclear?" Because we're really fanging to invest in it. Nobody is. Nobody that I've come across is. So I don't think if we lifted the ban, it'd make a difference.
Well, Jim, you mentioned AI and technology and aging population. I am conscious of the time we have with you. So maybe if we can just perhaps get a view on what other policies should we be thinking about that you're bringing to the election to help us understand more about your 2040 vision.
Yeah. So energy we've covered, big part of the story. AI we're working up with my colleague Ed Husick an AI capability plan, and what we're trying to do there is to say to Australia and Australians, AI is a huge opportunity for Australia, whether it's data centres or in other ways. And so we want to make the most of that opportunity. We want to make sure that we have the capability to do that rather than just focus on the guardrails and the restrictions. That's important, but it's a sliver of the story, not the main part of the story. The main part of the story is the opportunity. So AI capability plan, TAFE and university training in tech, so that we can adapt and adopt that technology. Ageing, we've put a lot of work into aged care reform. My colleagues Annika Wells and Mark Butler have done a heap of work there. Make it sustainable, make sure that we can afford to provide older Australians with the care that they need and deserve when they're in their older years. That's a big part of it. The industrial composition part is about making sure we've got a manufacturing sector, particularly in the clean energy part of it, but not just that. The services sector, the care economy. And so we've tried to use those big shifts in our economy identified by the intergenerational report as a kind of a set of guiding principles, because we've got responsibilities to the future, intergenerational responsibilities, and a lot of our policies in energy, in human capital and skills, in ageing. A lot of our global engagement is about trying to position Australia so that as all of this churn and change happens in the global economy, we can be beneficiaries rather than victims of it.
And so then if we come back to, I guess, your key portfolio and what underpins everything we've spoken about, but probably most importantly, what enables the investment to achieve a lot of these things, is our tax settings and our, our revenue base for the government. So tax has become one of the key debates of the election. Fuel excise, temporary tax cuts, permanent tax cuts. What's the size of them? That's kind of been the debate. So just give us your view, and I guess give us your pitch. Why should we trust you to build that sustainable tax base over Angus Taylor to help us achieve some of these longer term ambitions? Yeah,
I think you're right, Alec. It's a big difference between the parties. And the main difference is, for the third time since I've been Treasurer, we're cutting income taxes for all 14 million Australian taxpayers. Our political opponents have said that they'll legislate to increase taxes on those 14 million Australians. That is a really important difference. There are some other tax changes as well. We're reforming, simplifying income taxes with our standard deduction. Our opponents have got some temporary measures. And so there is a lot there. I think it helps to come back to where you started the question, thinking about capital flows and Australia's competitiveness, cutting income taxes 3 times as part of that story, but also to recognise that in this kind of global scramble for capital, in a world where the Americans are kind of rewriting the rules of the global economy, we think Australia is going to become a more attractive proposition for the world's capital, and we really welcome that. And tax is part of that story, but really when I engage with international investors, as you would, they're really interested in our skills base, our energy base, our industrial base, our resources base, all of that, and what that means for our attractiveness as an investment destination. So one of the things I'm really motivated for a second term, if we can win one, on the 3rd of May, is really to help make Australia a more attractive investment destination. The Americans have given us, I think, a big opportunity here. The way that the world is kind of rethinking its supply chains and its arrangements, and it's the way that it directs its capital and makes its capital decisions. And in that, I think Australia is really competitive. Tax is part of it, but all of those other things are important too.
Now, Jim, one final question. If you are successful and are re-elected on the 3rd of May, what are the metrics that we should hold you to account for? What would your economic scorecard be?
Well, I like to think about building on the progress we've made to here. If you look around the world and think about the kind of major dashboard of economic data that every country cares most about. In Australia, we've got inflation down a lot, real wages and incomes are growing again. Unemployment is low, actually the lowest average unemployment of any government in 50 years. We've got the debt down, interest rates have started to come down, growth rebounding in our economy as well. And so those half a dozen or so indicators are really important to us. Those are the things that I focus most on. And really the people-facing parts of that are the parts that matter a great deal to me. Real wages. When we came to office, real wages were falling, living standards were falling sharply, inflation was galloping, interest rates had already started to come up. So we've turned that around, we've turned a corner in our economy, and those are the sorts of things that will continue to get most of our attention.
Well, Jim, thank you so much for taking your time with us today. We do really appreciate it, and all the best for May 3rd.
It's good of you to have me on, guys. All the best for the podcast, and maybe we can have another yak after the election, whatever the result.
Sounds good. We'd love that. Sounds good.
Welcome back to Equity Mates Investing. You've just heard from current Treasurer or sitting Treasurer Jim Chalmers. Now it is time to hear from Shadow Treasurer Angus Taylor. Well, Angus, welcome to Equity Mates.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
So before we get into, I guess, the divisiveness of politics in the upcoming election, we wanted to start with what is one thing that you agree with your counterpart on?
Well, I think we all agree we want the very best for Australia. I think every politician can agree on that. We have different views about how to get there and what a better Australia looks like. And mine is very much around aspiration, opportunity, making sure that people can realise their dreams and doing it under their own steam. I mean, government can play a role, no doubt about that. But if government is the centrepiece of the community and society, then we've got a problem. It should be enabling. It shouldn't be the answer. And that's our picture, and that's probably where we disagree with the other side of politics to some degree at least.
Well, I think that's a good segue into how we want to frame this conversation, which is starting with the sort of long-term vision and then getting into the policies of today that will sort of get us on that journey. So let's start long-term. Let's pick a year in the future, 2045, 2050, whatever it is. What's your long-term vision for Australia's economy? What does it look like at that point?
Can I say, you mightn't love this answer, but
it's great.
My vision is the vision of 27 million Australians. It's not government that should determine what people want from their lives. It should be them. But what that means about government is we've got to be empowering them to do that. We've got to be ensuring they're in a situation where they can realise those dreams, where they can buy and own a home and pay it off, where they can build a business, get into small business in particular, which I think is getting harder for the younger generation and seen as a really high-risk thing to do. We should be empowering that. Now, where they choose to take that is really a matter for them. If I was to step back and guess, I think Australia will continue to be really strong in all the things we've been strong in for a long time. We've got amazing people. We're a really highly educated country. We're an incredibly tolerant country. And that means opportunities come our way. And we've been the lucky country because we've been smart about it. And I think we'll continue to be. That's the vision, is that we make sure that 27 million, it'll be more than that by then, of course, Australians really get those opportunities to go out and realise their dreams.
So you mentioned a few things there, like the ability to start a business, entrepreneurship, the ability to buy a house, education. What are some of the key, I guess, policies that you will be bringing to the election that kind of touch on those sort of aspirations and dreams of everyday Australians?
Well, we've got to reverse the loss we've had in our standard of living over the last couple of years. I mean, we've gone backwards. It's got harder to buy a home. It's got harder to build a business. It's got harder to get ahead. It's got harder to pay off your mortgage. And people are really labouring under a situation where they're not totally sure what's going on, but they know it's got harder. And we've got to reverse that. That's the first order. Because if we lose hope as a country, if individuals in Australia lose hope about the possibility of owning a home or the possibility of building a business successfully, then we've lost hope in the things that really make Australia the incredible country that it's been to me and to so many for so long. So that does mean making sure government knows its place, that we don't have overzealous regulators, that they're not getting in the way of people getting on with their lives and building their businesses and building their careers. And I think we have seen some of that. I mean, we've seen government spending increasing at a rapid rate in recent years. We've seen more and more aggressive regulation going on around the country. It's very hard to get things approved. It's very hard to get houses built. And we're seeing a construction sector that's got enormously expensive. Anyone listening who's been building a home or renovating a home, you'll see it. It's just everything's got way more expensive. So we've got to make it easier. We've got to make it easier. And that will be the centrepiece of what we're doing. And that includes things like being able to access some of your superannuation to buy a home. It means making sure that government is investing in the infrastructure that ensures that developers can build more homes. If we don't get more homes built, we're not going to be able to own more homes. It means making sure small business is not being given a hard time by a rampaging ATO. We hear lots of those stories. The ATO has an enormously important role to play in our economy. But its job, like any regulator, should be one where it's not just doing what it has to do, which is raise tax revenue in its case, but also making sure that businesses are in a position where they can succeed. And that's getting the balance right that I think has been wrong in the last couple of years.
Well, there's a number of threads to pull on there and a number of policy areas that we want to ask you about. Let's start with entrepreneurship. So if the overall goal is to make things easier for people to start small businesses and then grow them and employ more people, like what are the key levers that you can pull? Like where do you think it's really hard now and where can government play a role?
Yeah, well, the first thing is government get out of the way when they should, which was the point I was making. I mean, if you're running a small business these days, farmer, a small business person, retail, whatever it is, IT business, the work you have to do, particularly as your business grows around industrial relations, around occupational health and safety, and some of these are state issues, of course, around getting approvals, it is really hard. It's got a whole lot harder, and that's showing up in our standard of living. Our standard of living's gone backwards by 8% in 2.5 years. So to put that in really practical terms, what that means is the income of the typical Australian is buying 8% less in goods and services than it was just a couple of years ago. Right? That's an incredible drop, unprecedented and unrivaled across the world. So we've got to make it easier. If it's easier for people to invest, to grow their businesses, to build their careers, then it's easier for them to add value to the economy and to make it stronger and more prosperous for everybody. And that's the key. There are other specific levers that we've already announced. I mean, for instance, for small businesses, making it easier or giving them incentives to invest. So accelerated depreciation is really important. What that means is a small business can immediately write off for tax purposes an investment it makes in plant and equipment. And that encourages investment, and investment is the key to building a strong economy. Good investment by business, small and large, is critical. And that, of course, is only possible with financial investors placing their money well, which is important too.
One thing that I think a lot of small businesses are talking about a lot, and certainly it's been part of your policy mix in the lead up to the election, is energy prices. Yep. So talk to us about the vision there, and I guess with nuclear as well. Give us the pitch.
Yeah, this is a big enabler. I always say there's three really big enabling sectors for our businesses across Australia. Construction, where we've got to get the big rampaging unions that have had links to the criminal underworld. We've got to get that. We've got to make it easier to build things. Financial services, which I've been touching on there, where the regulators have, I think, overreached, and it means it's harder to get a loan and harder to get access to finance than it's been for a long, long time. And then the third one is energy, which is the one you raise. We've got to make it more affordable to run a business that uses energy, and more affordable for households as well. And that means, like, the answer to most problems, if you want to make something more affordable, is you've got to get more supply into the market. You've got to get more supply into the market. In the short term, we'll continue to see people put solar on their roofs, and that's it's a good thing. Knock yourself out. Fantastic. But we've also got to have that dispatchable generation that gives balance in the system. In the short term, that's got to be gas. We have to make better use of the incredible natural gas resources we have. We can't shut down our coal generators before we're ready to. And then in time, we need that baseload zero emissions power, which most of the tech sector around the world are embracing like there's no tomorrow. Most developed countries around the world, and that's zero emissions nuclear. And I think that is a really important stake in the ground for longer term having an energy system that has the reliability and affordability that we so desperately need. And it's a replacement for those coal-fired generators that play an important role in our system but can't be around forever.
Let me follow up on the short term and the long term. Short term gas, if we need more gas, would you think about something like the reserve system in WA to keep more gas onshore and to actually keep prices down?
It's a great question. I'd say short term by the way, is balance, but the balance at the moment needs more gas.
Yeah.
And balance is the key in energy systems. They don't work unless you have balance. But you're right, to get more gas into the system, we've got to make sure there's more Australian gas working for Australians. And in particular on the East Coast, West Coast, we've got a reservation system, which has not always been easy, but it's, broadly speaking, works pretty well. The East Coast, we haven't. So we've got to find a way of getting more gas into the system. And the key to that is working with the big exporting companies to make sure they're putting enough gas into the system. Now, when I was Energy Minister, we did a lot of that. I worked with them and talked with them all the time. They always assured me they'd get more gas into the system, and they did. And we had gas prices way lower than they are today. Way lower than they are today through the time I was Energy Minister. But the quid pro quo was we would help to make sure they could get their developments and approvals that they needed to invest in the gas at the other end. And, like all business people, if you make it easier for them to do what they've got to do, they can deliver to their customers more easily. And that was the approach we took, and it is the approach we'll take again.
And then long-term nuclear. I think, a lot of people see what's happening overseas, and, for people that are interested in low-carbon baseload power, it's particularly exciting to see the developments in that space. I guess the question a lot of people have with the coalition policy in Australia is the investment the government would make, because that's the key difference. If you look in America, it's private sector investment. How does the government investment here align with everything you spoke about earlier around private sector driving the outcomes?
Well, can I just clarify that may be true largely in America. It's less true if you go to other parts of the world, the UK and France and elsewhere. Sadly, energy at the moment as a sector, not just in Australia, but across much of the world, is one where, for a whole variety of reasons, and we could spend all day debating them, the interventions in the past have meant that it's very hard to get any investment to happen in a balanced way without the government being more involved than I would like. That's the reality. I'm a pragmatist about this. What we have to have first and foremost is affordable, reliable power with falling emissions over time. And ultimately that's required it does require now some government intervention. We want it to be as little as possible, and we'll continue to go down that path. But to get the nuclear energy sector going in this country, we're going to have some government involvement. I just don't think there's any other way around it. And it'll build on the work we're doing on nuclear submarines and the important step we've taken there with defence. I just think that strengthens our defence force enormously. We'll build capability and we can use that in civil capability as well.
So, Angus, obviously housing is another sort of, major aspiration of many Australians. And you mentioned earlier on you're looking at allowing first home buyers to access their super. Is that the tentpole policy for housing?
No, it's not the only one. It's an important one, though. Your super is your money, and Australians sometimes hear governments talk about super as though it's their money. It's not. It's a bizarre situation right now where you can use your superannuation to invest in anybody's home except your own. Well, that just makes no sense to me. So allowing a portion of it to be used for buying your own home, I think, is important. But we've got to get the supply side right too. And we know on the supply side, building up anything at the moment in this country is way too hard. The approvals processes, the involvement, particularly when it comes to apartments, the CFMEU and other unions, the costs have gone through the roof. It takes too long. The building industry is in meltdown. We're seeing huge levels of insolvencies in the industry. We've got to get it back on a good footing. So the supply side needs to be fixed. Right at the heart of that is making sure we're getting the investment in infrastructure necessary to build houses that have access to good transport and all the other infrastructure you need. You've got houses in my electorate that are ready to go or built in some cases that don't have water. They're not connected to the water system. This is just nuts. It's unbelievable. How did we get to this point? So we've put aside $5 billion, which will be specifically for infrastructure that enables housing to get moving and unlocking those housing opportunities. We talk to councils across the country about what opportunities they've got that are being held up by lack of infrastructure. There's a lot. we can see we can move a lot of housing very, very fast by opening this up. So this is a big one for us. Talk about the demand side, but the supply side is incredibly important.
On housing, the criticism of the super policy is always the New Zealand example, and the idea that New Zealanders could access their KiwiSaver accounts, and it didn't increase rates of home ownership and it just pushed up prices. How do you think about that potential outcome here in Australia?
Yeah, because they had a broken supply side. Like so much of our economy right now, the supply side of much of the New Zealand economy in recent years has been broken, including housing. And if you have demand initiatives, which is making it easier to buy a home, which is what having access to your superannuation account does, you've also got to focus on the supply side. So you've got to do both. If you do both, it's pretty basic economics that if you get your supply side right and people find it easier to buy the thing, then it can all work. That's the key for me is you've got to do both. They didn't in New Zealand.
Will it be phased, though, if you guys do it? Because I feel like if you switch the tap on to...
No, well, I think we can switch the tap on supply side fast. I mean, I think there's, as I say, there's lots ready to go in my own part of the world. Like they can be built fast. Builders ready to go. We've increasingly got spare capacity in the industry to do it. And yet it's being held back right now. This is crazy stuff. So I think we can get things moving fast. And that's what we have to do, not just in housing, but right across the economy, in the resources sector, as I said, more broadly in the construction sector, in energy. Just get the supply side moving and, tap into the amazing energy and motivation of Australians. But right now, that's not being tapped into in the way that it could be to get these sectors moving, and housing's right at the top of the list.
It's easy to sort of, point to regulation and say there's too much red tape, but then it's a lot harder to then actually identify, like, here's where we're really going to pull it back and make a difference. Sure. I guess unless you're Elon Musk and you walk in with a chainsaw. But what are some of the specific regulations that you think really these are the things that are holding businesses?
Well, I'll give one. You're an investment podcast, so I'll give you one on that side that I think is really important. APRA, is the prudential regulator, is making it harder to lend and finance than is necessary.
Okay.
And we've made this really clear that, yes, it's incredibly important that APRA makes sure we've got a stable financial system that we can trust. If we don't have that, investment and lending, financing is really hard. But on the other hand, if it's so obsessed with its own pure goal and ignores have people got the access to finance they need to build a business, to own a home, to do the things in their life they want to do, then it's a real problem. And APRA has become way more aggressive in the capital requirements for every loan. So that makes every loan more expensive than it needs to be, and it makes it harder to access. And it's why what we're seeing across the economy now is private finance, which is when you go, if you're a small business, for instance, you go and get private credit, not from a bank, but from a private lender. It's exploding.
Yeah.
Because what they're doing is they're getting around the heavy-handed regulation we're seeing from APRA. Now, some people think the answer to that is to regulate the hell out of private lending. I say, no. No. Make it easier for everybody to get a loan. And, this is particularly true if you're trying to start a business. I mean, trying to start a business now, if you don't own a home and can't mortgage your house to start that business, it's really hard. Unless it's a low finance business, you don't need much capital. It's really, really hard. It's way harder than when I was, in my 20s and 30s.
Yeah.
Even owning a business and trying to buy a home is bloody hard.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
We're talking
that
our own
business,
book there,
it's going to suck up too much money. And so the regulators, I think, have lost sight of balance in what they do. Yes, there's got to be a stable financial system. Yes, we've got to be able to trust the financial system and make sure that SPIVs, are dealt with properly. But on the other hand, we've got to make it accessible and affordable for people. And right now, that's not true. And I think all of the regulators need to be instructed and guided to make sure they get that balance right.
You've set yourself a tough task because on one hand, it's like government policy, which is, black and white, and you can point to regulators or regulations, or you can point to different laws and different levers that you can pull. But on the other hand, it's almost like a spiritual or a vibes shift that you're trying to affect. It's like, you mentioned earlier that you want Australians to have hope and that you want them to then invest in their own businesses for the future. And that is something that is difficult for for anyone, really. So how do you think about like that cultural shift that you want to effectuate to really encourage entrepreneurship?
Well, I think it's waiting to happen. I think Australians are naturally pretty enterprising and pretty entrepreneurial, but if they're crushed by a bureaucracy, they're not going to be enterprising and entrepreneurial, are they? And I think a lot of Australians feel pretty constrained. I think we've gone through an era where there was this feeling of constraint. A lot of younger Australians I speak to, my kids are aged between sort of 18 and 25. You know, the idea of going into business is really frightening now. And they've watched their parents. You know, I come from a farming family, and they've watched their parents really battle. And so there's been this discouragement. But we are a pioneering people. We are an entrepreneurial people. We are enterprising. I mean, you only have to look at new Australians to see that they see the opportunity to start a business in Australia, and they get out there and have a crack. They've come from a very tough background in many cases, but it's waiting to happen, and we've got to tap into it. And I think if we tap into it, we can get that shift, not just a shift in people's behaviour, but in the mindset as well, which is what you're describing.
So, Angus, if you're successful and win government, what is going to be your economic scorecard? What are the key metrics that you want Ren and I to talk about every day on our podcast? As if you're doing a good job or not.
Oh, amazing returns on investment, right?
Yeah, the ASX 200.
All these people you've had on your show.
Get to that. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, prosperity is important. You know, prosperity is if people feel like they can get ahead, they can work hard, and then on the back of that hard work, they can get ahead, then it does make the world a place where there is hope, where there is aspiration. And that's what I really want to see. How do you measure that? I mean, standard of living is really important. If it's going backwards, we're not a country that is used to the idea that the income of the average Australian in real terms has gone backwards by 8% in 2.5 years. That's the worst in the world, by the way, of our peer countries. There's no other country that's seen it. And we've never seen that before since the data was first collected on this in the 1950s. So, you know, that's when people lose hope. So it's re-establishing that hope and that rising prosperity over time. If there's rising prosperity, there's opportunity. And that's what we want to see, and that's what we want to re-establish.
What do you think about the concept of a well-being budget? Like for people who aren't familiar, it's having different metrics than just overall GDP as sort of the measure of how the economy's going. And, you know, you've mentioned that our living standards have fallen. I think the stat that always gets me is we had 7 quarters of falls in GDP per capita, and then we had 0.1% uptick in the most recent quarter. So it was it arrested the trend.
And everyone was high-fiving. I mean, seriously. So there's no high-fives on those numbers.
So what do you think about like redefining like what good looks like in and actually measuring like I guess more accurate measures of economic well-being?
Yeah, I don't pretend for a second that financial prosperity is the answer to all life's challenges.
No.
Friends, family, relationships, all powerful. But I tell you, it's all a bit easier if you're getting ahead, right? Yeah. There's no doubt about that. And that's why I do think that financial measures are important. Economic measures are important. They're not the only measures, but they're really important. But right now, for a lot of Australians, a well-being budget is their budget and their ability to pay their mortgage and to pay their bills, pay their energy bills, pay their insurance bills, pay their grocery bills. I mean, that's well-being right now. Australians are, in many cases, really struggling with those basics, paying their rent, being able to put themselves in a position to buy a house. And, of course, this is, you know, I'm 58. I look at my generation and the opportunities we have, and I'm deeply concerned that my kids and the generations that follow will not have the amazing opportunities I've had in the greatest country in the world. We can't afford to go backwards on this. We've got to go forward. So that's well-being right now, I would say.
I like that.
I think that's what the focus should be. The government did a well-being budget, but my comment on that was, well, the well-being budget that counts is whether people can pay their mortgages and pay their bills.
Well, cost of living is a good segue to a conversation that's been going on, I guess, in the media, and I think probably in your party room around big business and particularly the supermarkets. Peter Dutton had that one comment about breaking up insurance companies as well. But I think really the focus of big business and potentially breaking up big business is the supermarkets, or at least more regulation there. So talk to us about your view on the supermarket specifically and the bigger businesses generally.
Well, so I worked before politics for many years in business. I was a partner in a major consulting firm at McKinsey, and my big business were my clients, right? And I think business is always at its best when it's focusing on its core mission, which is to serve customers well so that the customers love what they're getting from you, and in the process make sure that you can ensure that your employees are well off and your shareholders do okay. I mean, that's the mission of business. Somewhere along the way, we decided that wasn't enough. I mean, I think that's magnificent. I think when a business serves its customers well and the customer walks out buying that good or service and says, wow, that was incredible, and the employee gets a kick out of it and is well paid, and the shareholders get a good return, that's phenomenal. And we should celebrate it every single day. But what started happening is businesses said, no, we've got to do all these other things, and we've got to get involved in political campaigns and, the referendum, of course. And so I just think that's not where business should be. But it's important that all businesses serve their customers. And generally speaking, the best regulator for any industry is the customer. They regulate the business better than anybody because they know what they want. But if there's not enough competition, that's why we have competition policy. And in some of the sectors in Australia, they've been pretty tight. We are the land. I learnt when I was a partner at McKinsey, we're the land of the duopoly. Big time. Which is one better than New Zealand, we're the land of the monopoly. So those businesses do have to serve their customers. And if they're not, if they're acting in an anti-competitive way, and it's been demonstrated that they have, then there should be consequences for that. And I think most business people, most of the time, are working to serve their customers. But there'll be occasions when it is right for the government to step in.
Now, as you can probably tell, we're very passionate here at Equity Mates about financial literacy. Yeah. In fact, we're kind of concerned that study after study shows it's going backwards here in Australia. Plenty going on in the space at the moment in terms of, addressing the financial advice gap and the affordability. What can government do to really address the financial literacy issue in Australia?
Yeah, I think it's a really big deal. I'm passionate about it too, because I think if people are financially literate, they can take control of their own circumstances and put themselves in a much better position. Even just basic principles of investment make a really big difference over time. It's very cumulative, of course, as you know. So very powerful forces at work there if you can get it right. So this is why we've pushed very hard in this term, and actually when we were in government, to try to raise the quality of advice in the country. We commissioned a review on this when we were in government, which has been handed down in the last a couple of years ago, which we've been pushing hard to get implemented. And that makes sure that the purpose there is to get our advisory sector back on its feet.
Yeah.
After the Royal Commission, some bad things had happened. It needed to be reformed, but it needs to get back on its feet now and get going. And so there's a whole series of reforms that we're pushing, and we'll continue to push to strengthen the advice sector in this country. I think there can be more done back at the school and university level, at the education level too, and it's something that we're keen to explore ways we can strengthen just learning basic principles. When I was a kid, the Commonwealth Bank, God bless them,
I was going to say,
yeah.
They nailed that.
This is the thing. It was
good business. Great business. My wife still has a Commonwealth account, and it came from that. But there was something in that about. Put your money in. If you put the money in every week, you know what? Over time,
you tracked it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think it's really powerful.
Yeah, Dolomites was in schools for 90 years in Australia, and then potentially, rightly, we got rid of it, but we just didn't replace it with anything.
Yeah, right.
And it's a challenge because it's like the states ultimately are responsible for education, but. It feels like there's a big gap now.
No, I think this is really important, and we're keen to pursue options on it. And we're open to suggestions, by the way, as well.
Get Bryce and I into some schools.
We have a challenge.
We
have a challenge for you. Actually, imagine an Australia where everyone is so inherently obsessed with the performance of the ASX 200 as they are property.
Yeah, right. or the footy.
Or the footy. Like if media treated the stock market like they did property,
yeah, we wouldn't have Monday morning quarterbacks. We'd have Monday morning stockbrokers, right? I do think this is a big deal because the basic principles are not complicated.
No.
You know, I learned them back in finance at uni, and they've served me well, and they're very powerful. But I don't think we do a great job of getting them out into the community. That's why our advice sector is so important, because they are really critical to that. And the problem is advice is now becoming the domain only of the wealthy.
Yeah.
If you're an investor, you under your own steam, you're not going to start wealthy. The aim is to get wealthy,
exactly.
but you're not going to start there. Yeah. So we've got to find a way of building that capability earlier.
Yeah, it's something we're super passionate about, because we, in some ways, this whole business is like a function of the failure of advice regulation in Australia. Like, we shouldn't exist, really. Like, people should be able to go and get low-cost advice and get started, but we exist because they can't. And you're right, it's like the numbers of advisors have halved.
Yeah.
And now it seems the debate, since the quality of advice review came down, it seems the debate is like, should it be something that happens within super? And that seems to be potentially how one-sided politics is pushing. And then then it's like, or should it be a more wholesale change to the sector? Should we enable digital forms of advice? How do you think about like what changes we can actually
we're the latter. Unashamedly. I mean, we took the quality of advice review, and whilst that's not necessarily going to be the entire answer, we thought it was a very good start and should be implemented on whole. It's been, I think, controlled. The process has been controlled by the unions and industry super funds that play an important role, but the truth is they're not the whole financial sector, and we need a broader solution. In particular, if you've got wealth, there's no shortage of people wanting to serve you, to give you advice, and that's fine. The real challenge is when you're building wealth and you're getting started. If you're just relying on a TikTok finfluencer, get that word right, it can end badly. And so I think that lower cost source of advice, including technology, technology can play a huge role in this now, and will, I think, play a really big role in the coming years.
You see what's happening in the UK, in Canada, in the US, where the regulation isn't as strict, and the digital forms of advice.
Exactly right.
Yeah,
and I've seen lots of evidence of this, and I make a point of looking at what the technology platforms in other countries now, how they're evolving to provide that advice. It is improving at such a rapid rate. So we have to tap into that, and that'll mean it doesn't mean you don't have an advisor. By the way, digital advice will often be best done accompanied with an advisor, but it means an advisor can advise more and faster and more cheaply, cheaper, and so it can be more accessible, and that's what it's got to be.
Yeah. Well, that's music to our ears. So,
Well, I think you're right. Like, the more people can feel positive about their own financial situation and confident in what they're doing, like, it's just an unlock to everything we've just kind of spoken about.
But they also take risks then, right?
Yeah.
And whilst crazy risks are not what we want to do, that's not what good investment is. But calculated risks are really important in life. But you won't do that unless you have a degree of confidence in yourself and in your situation. And we have to give people that confidence. When you start a business, it is a big leap into a chasm. It feels like that. I've been there, and it's hard, right? So we've got to give people the confidence to get on and do it, and that's really important.
Yeah. Well, and the benefits go beyond just the economics. It's like once people feel financially secure and they've, got the house and stuff, it's like family formation, having kids, starting a business, as we've mentioned. It's like everything is unlocked by that feeling of security.
Exactly right. And just getting started on the investment journey requires a degree of confidence too. You mean I've got to take my money out of my bank account? At least no one can steal it from there. So it does require that level of confidence and some education, which is your point.
Nice. Well, Angus, we've taken a lot of your time today, and we want to say thank you. And our final question that we've been asking in these conversations is just give us the elevator pitch. Why should they vote for you and the coalition?
Well, it's really simple. We can't afford another 3 years like the last 3 years. If you lose 3 years in economic terms, it has a really big impact for a long time. We can't keep doing this. We can't keep going backwards. We've gone backwards too far in just 2.5 years so far, and a bit more time before the election. And I don't want to see Australia continue continue to go backwards. It is the country of hope. It is a country of aspiration. And I want people to have that confidence to get out there and have a crack. And that's what we stand for.
Well, Angus, thank you so much.
Good on you.
That brings us to the end of today's episode. We want to say a huge thank you to both parties for allowing Jim and Angus to come on. And we hope that you've been able to get a little bit more about the upcoming election and the policies that are important to you to help you decide what to do on May 3rd.
Yeah. Now, if you're new to Equity Mates, you've just come across this episode because you're interested in the election and the two treasurers. Make sure you subscribe wherever you're watching or listening. We're producing heaps of content here at Equity Mates, all in the aid of making the economy and the stock market accessible for everyone. We've got Equity Mates Investing. We've also got a sister podcast called Get Started Investing. It breaks down all the basics. And if you want a short, sharp summary of the news delivered to your inbox at 6 a.m. every weekday morning, then make sure you subscribe to our daily newsletter. No better way to start the day.
That's it.
But Bryce, that'll do it for our election series. If you haven't listened to our housing episode with the two housing ministers, go and give it a listen. But we'll be back in your feeds with our regularly scheduled investing program next week.
You have been listening to an Equity Mates Media production. In the spirit of reconciliation, Equity Mates Media acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. This podcast is intended for education and entertainment purposes. Any advice is general advice only and has not taken into account your personal financial circumstances, needs, or objectives. Before acting on general advice, you should consider if it is relevant to your needs and read the relevant product disclosure statement. And if you're unsure, please speak to a financial professional. The hosts of this podcast and their guests may have positions in the companies mentioned. Equity Mates Media operates under an Australian Financial Services Licence 540697.